Welcome back, friends, to Notes from My Nervous System. I'm Erin, a therapist, mom, and creator of the Mind Circuit app, a little app you can use to regulate your emotions and have it right there in your pocket. Today, I'm super excited because there is a professor who agreed to be on my podcast from my alma mater, Northeastern Illinois University. I got my master's in counseling way back when in 2008, not to date myself. And Dr. Bloom is currently a professor there at NEIU. He's also a licensed clinical professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. He has experience working with diverse clients in a variety of settings, and he specializes in addressing issues related to trauma, anger management, anxiety, and depression. And his research interests include the influence of technology on interpersonal and romantic relationships, and recently looking at the mind-body pain disorders. And welcome, Dr. Bloom. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Now, I loved my time at Northeastern, even though it was a master's program and I was working full time and going to school full time and actually come an internship of courses and paid for. But the classes were so rich and the professors you could tell really cared. And so it just made a world of difference. So anytime I can reach out to NEIU, I always do. But I appreciate your time because I'm sure you have a lot to be doing right now.
Well, this is that time in the semester where things wind down, but yeah, we get to catch up on paperwork. I got to tell you though, I think the program's probably pretty different from when you last saw it. I think most faculty have probably retired at this point.
They have. When I was searching people up, I was like, "I don't know you, I don't know you, I don't know you."
Yeah.
And then I was like, "Well, they're at Northeastern. I'm sure they're nice."
I remember when Chuck Pistorio retired, he was saying that
Yes, he
academia
was
has
my
a.
advisor.
Was he really? Okay.
Yes, we used to email.
He said academia has a short memory and it's very quick to move on. And that seems to be the case.
It is, but I still remember him and all the guidance he gave me. So I'm always appreciative to anybody in a university setting because I know how difficult it can be and how all encompassing it is. And then, your students move on to the next year and the next professor. And so they don't always remember, but I do.
I found that with some students, they come back and it's kind of cool to see where they've gone, what they've done, and yet here I am in the same spot, and it's like watching a conveyor belt, not realizing how long I've just been standing in one spot watching that conveyor belt move.
I felt that way when I worked for Chicago Public Schools, and I would have kiddos come back and tell me what high school they got into. And I was like, I remember you in kindergarten. I don't think this is right.
Yeah.
But it was always nice when they would remember and then come back and check in. So I am fascinated with the your interest in the pain and body and what's going on that and where the research is leading because my brain immediately goes to all the issues with people on pain medication and also people not always being believed when they're
Yeah.
in pain. I have personally had some clients who have been turned away by professionals thinking that they were seeking drugs. And the one ended up at Duke getting a hysterectomy because they needed that, but they were labeled a druggie. And it just infuriates me. So this topic very much speaks to me and the need for the understanding of pain.
Well, there's a lot of branches and sub branches to it, but I would say what got me into it is that I think when I turned about 38, I thought or felt like my body was falling apart. And I've always been a very athletic guy. And I started to notice all these old pains and old injuries were showing up and not getting better. And I started to get really afraid of what that would mean if this joint went bad or this thing broke or that tore or whatever this thing is here. And so I actually started to dive into the literature and I found something really alarming that I really couldn't make sense of because I grew up really believing in the medical model and the medical system. And I don't mean to
Damn.
sway people from that, but I would find that there was not a great success rate with a lot of like back surgeries, rotator cuff surgeries. And actually, what studies show us is that there's an influence of emotion and social supports that can predict outcomes. So people who feel resilient, have a positive mindset, they tend to do better than others. But if a problem is specifically and surely and only a physical problem, you would think mindset shouldn't really matter. So I was
No,
starting to
I
see
wouldn't.
study after study kind of revealing this sort of pattern. And eventually there were a catalog of studies that show that if you do an MRI with people in pain compared to the general population, you can't actually tell the difference in the set of MRIs, which belongs to which group,
Interesting.
and yet only certain people are reporting pain. And so there's a lot of not professional, but a lot of people who play tennis who have torn rotator cuffs and they're just not even aware of it. They sometimes have a little shoulder discomfort. The shoulders of climbers, for example, have plenty of abnormalities in them, but they're highly functional and better than the general population more often than not. So I got really interested in that and then starting to understand there's something called neuroplastic pain, which is this idea that pain is
Mhm.
not necessarily something that exists in the body, but something happens in the body that sends signals to the brain, and the brain determines this is worth your attention or not. And if you have an agitated nervous system under a lot of stress and tension and a lot of fear and
Okay.
meaning making
Mm.
about this stuff, it will send pain signals before there is actually a problem because it anticipates a problem. It believes it's in danger. So there's a lot of great books about this. And I was introduced to the work of Dr. John Sarno, who pioneered tension myonitis syndrome or tension myoneural syndrome, the works of Steve Ozanich, who also wrote on that. So anyway, I can go on about this for forever, but it just totally turned my world upside down to recognize that emotionality and mindset really plays a very important role in our experience of our bodies and the pain we're in. Surgery might not always be the best option.
That's interesting that all the science is pointing that way, but I don't see a lot of surgeons or centers for pain really highlighting that and having therapists be part of like their practice.
There are a few. So it's not all the science. It's often really framed by how the questions are asked in the literature in terms of what is
Okay.
found too. And even some of the findings can be interpreted in different ways. So I'll be reading something that they'll say, we need to repeat the study, we need to do it different. And I'm seeing like a clear pattern that the thing that you're supposed to be saying, like for the example I'm thinking of, I'm thinking of this study where they looked at somebody with a torn distal bicep tendon, which is where the bicep attaches near the forearm. If that
Ooh.
tears, your bicep rolls up. It turns out your bicep isn't just for this up and down motion. Your bicep is for supinating. But it turns out
Oh.
too that you can actually continue that motion even with a ruptured tendon. It actually heals faster without surgery. And if with surgery you get up to say 90% of your strength back, without surgery you could get back up to 70, 80%. Some people who really exercise and work on it after, they seem to not even notice much of a difference. But surgery carries a lot of risks with it. So anyway, there's a lot of ways to interpret the results. And I bring up this because they were, in one study I'm thinking of, they were assessing a new measure. How well does this measure pick up differences between groups? Their takeaway was it doesn't distinguish between groups well enough. We got to work on the measure, but there's still other measures being used. So my interpretation was it might just be that surgery isn't really as important as the message is around it to have surgery, at least in that case. That's just one example. But thinking of like back pain and things like that, there is a spine surgeon, Dr. Hanscom, I believe is his name, who really doesn't do back surgery anymore. He has his own method of mind body talk therapy, directing your own care kind of work to do. And he makes profound difference in people's lives. And it's really just turning your eyes inside to see what's going on in there.
That's interesting. What is his name again?
I
I
think it's
gotta look
Dr.
him up.
Hanscom, Hanscome, I want to say. David Hanscom, I believe.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to look that up. I find that interesting. It's always incredible to me how much the mind, your beliefs, your attitudes, that inner dialogue impacts your health, your well-being. And
Absolutely.
it doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yeah. There's a, I'm sure you've heard of the book When the Body Says No by Dr. Gabor Mate,
Mm.
all about that. And just how personality seems to be an influence on what kind of manifestations of disease or illness show up, which is just, again, wildly fascinating. Things I didn't learn about growing up, things that still aren't really
No.
talked about now.
It's still not talked about enough, and I wish there was a way for kiddos within the school system to be at least exposed to some of these ideas or
Yeah.
concepts. Maybe one day I'll figure that out.
Well, a good spot. I mean, I used to be a teacher. I don't know if you knew that, but I was a middle
I
school
didn't know that.
English language arts teacher. Yeah, but I really left it because I didn't agree so much with public education and how it worked, and I was pretty frustrated. But
Oh, no, I understand.
there's a lot to be desired in terms of our physical education, what we teach in terms of nutrition, the kind of nutrition offered to students in a school setting. unrealistic expectations, having them sit through a class when they got this energy that they need to play. And then the first thing they cut is,
Exactly. You
extracurriculars. It's
cannot
terrible.
you can't sit there for 8 hours. I can't do that as an adult. Why am
No.
I expecting a middle schooler to do it? And then why am I surprised when they have an outburst?
Then we
What
just
else
throw
are they
worksheets
gonna
at
do with
them.
all their energy?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you being from the school system, what's something you would implement or do a little different during the day that would help with that?
I think fundamentally there's just so much that needs to change. So you have this discrepancy in terms of tax dollars that go to some school districts, but not others. And so when they get a lot of money, they tend to be just pumping technology into the classroom. But then that also requires that we start using these technological tools. But I don't know that that's really helpful for learning. To me, learning is not rote memorization and regurgitation. It's critical thinking. And I can't think of many classrooms I've been in where they really teach critical thinking. So I'd say we'd probably have to rewind and go back to the start from quite a few different standpoints.
No, I agree. Me knowing my times table or different verbs or whatnot, I mean, it's great. You should have a basis, but when I'm in the real world, it is that critical thinking piece. It is being able to interact in the world at large and have conversations and make connections. It's also the importance of having your nervous system feel that it's safe because if it's not safe, you can't learn, you can't connect.
Well,
You're
part
just
of
in
feeling safe
survival mode.
is it's being seen and understood and validated. And I think kids are naturally pretty good bullshit detectors, and they
Yes, they
know that
are.
what's the point of this? Why am I being forced into this?
I always loved that. It's one of the reasons I stuck with public schools as long as I did, almost 10 years, is just because they were so good at calling bullshit. It was so refreshing to constantly be around a bunch of students who just called it for what it was, saw it for what it was. And if you related to them in an honest way, whether they disagreed with you or not, they would always be respectful towards me. Or, they may not have been big into mental health or felt it was super important, but they liked to talk to me. So, I took what I could, but it was nice to have that as an adult. It's incredible how many people you get around who just BS, and it is harder to catch it. So,
Yeah. There's a lot of, yeah. I mean, I'm sure I'm not here to talk about education, but there's a lot I would change if it were up to me.
hey, we're here to talk about anything that involves mental health, and education definitely impacts one's mental health. I mean, you spend so much of your time in the classroom as a young kiddo. So,
Well, I think it speaks to the microcosm of how, again, back to medicine, we specialize in individual body parts, failing to look at the holistic way in which the body works. So we tend to mental health in this unique, specialized subset way, but at the expense of education and vice versa. And these things are all part of the same organism. So how do we tie it all together and say yes and rather than to dive further and further into our own unique specialty at the exclusion of something else?
do you find that difficult? I mean, you're a professor who specializes in certain fields and you're a licensed therapist. Do you find it difficult not to have that like narrow view when you're working with individuals?
I don't
Or
I don't
what
think it's
helps you be more holistic, I guess?
I think I'm just naturally a really curious person. So if somebody says something interesting to me, my questions tend to want to know more about where, why, when, how. And so getting those data points, it becomes easier to connect the dots. And think of the person you mentioned who needed the hysterectomy and ended up with being told that they weren't experiencing pain. I've worked with
Oh, yeah.
people with kind of the opposite, where they have these physical complaints, but no doctor is treating them, and there isn't something wrong there, but it is that mental emotional thing. And so,
Oh,
how do we dive into
interesting.
that? Well, those puzzle pieces start to show up. So, like, usually when working with somebody with pain in and around sex, that usually relates back to trauma. But it's hard for people who aren't familiar with this work to understand that. What do you mean my body is experiencing pain without something painful causing it? Or that this idea of this emotional inflammation, so to speak, can manifest as like a physical inflammation. And that's really interesting to me. So asking those kinds of questions are really important, but practicing as a counselor or a therapist, it's really important to also not overstep my bound because I'm not a doctor, not a medical doctor at least. So you always have to refer out to get a clear bill of health and make sure that this mind body thing is really just that. It's a mind body thing. and there isn't something structural or like a tumor or something to be addressed.
So do you have your clients then get that bill of health first before you
Oh,
start doing the
sometimes.
Okay.
Depends on what the issue, like, I'm thinking of somebody I worked with who had interstitial cystitis and pain during sex, but it was important for her to, like, she had to get medically clear to figure out what is going on and then to make sure there isn't something dangerous to attend to, and then we could start to figure out maybe some of the more emotional aspects around her experience.
There is that, what is it? Phantom limb pain, and
Sure.
everybody truly understands that. Why do you think it's so much more difficult when we're talking about trauma to understand the pain associated with
Well, I
the
think
trauma?
that's interesting. I don't know that everybody agrees that phantom pain, limb
Oh,
pain is really a
really?
thing. So there are maybe some discrepancies there, but yeah, the idea that the brain has hardwired, there is this space for this thing, and yet it's so it can fire signals to something that's not there. But it shows exactly, I think, to our point that your experience isn't necessarily based in reality. It can be influenced by these other factors.
Do you have difficulty getting clients to even come through your door with that approach? Or is that something you
No,
dive
because
into later?
it's not even something I advertise or bring up. People usually come to me because there's something wrong, and maybe they even have a hard time articulating what that is. And it's in a relationship or the way they feel, an emotional thing, maybe a life transition. But it's through doing our work, we'll start to notice this lifelong rash problem that they've had.
Mhm.
Well, it flares up around times of stress. And if we look at all the times we've been stressed, it's only the subset of times where we're stressed about rejection that leads to. So then that becomes interesting when we dive into themes around rejection in life. And then it's not even that we're trying to make the rash go away, but actually by not attaching to the rash, letting that just be a thing that happens, but exploring those themes around rejection, that the rash will actually maybe naturally resolve if it's no longer really serving the body anymore, if it's no longer serving the mind to bring whatever that issue was to our attention. In that case, at least.
I find it very fascinating and very, it just reinforces how important it is to understand that the brain, the mental health, any type of health, dental, eye, like it's all
Yeah.
interconnected. You can't just look at one piece.
Right. I love the idea that, flossing prevents heart disease. Like
Yes.
something you would not expect, but very important to take care of those teeth, to take care of your heart.
Absolutely. I've been calling, doing some bilateral stimulation, just doing that calm, rhythmic butterfly tapping, brain flossing, because it just helps to get some of the gunk out, that emotional residue and give that message to the nervous system for a moment that it's safe. And I just believe as much as we can reinforce that we're safe in safe environments, it'll help our nervous system, which is constantly under attack in the society we're living in right now.
Maybe. Even that sounds a little bit like a mindset, right?
It does. I would love to research and tease out the differences. Is it more mindset? Is it the feedback to the nervous system? Is it both?
Yeah, it's kind of this collaborative, co-created process, I think. I mean, we could that's a little too big for me to dive into right now, probably.
It's okay. I'm just talking.
Yeah.
I just find all this stuff interesting, especially when it could be more accessible to people to help more people.
Which part? The like strategies for like nervous system regulation or
All the above, anything that can help an individual better understand their mind, their brain, their body, and how it impacts their health
yeah.
so that they have some agency again over their lives.
Yeah. Well, again, that brings it back to is there a space or an opportunity for that in the education system to help people know and understand their equipment a little better? This is the car we're driving for the rest of our lives, so we should try to understand the manual a little bit. Get a manual at least.
It would be nice. Do you know of any other countries that approach it like that?
That I don't know.
I'd be curious if there are other countries that approach it more like this is your manual, your body understanding everything holistically. Because if there is, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know.
I'm gonna have to Google that after
Mhm.
this.
Ask gay.
AI does not always give me correct
No,
answers,
I know that's true.
but it is nice to have a tool. You just
Mm.
got to make sure, like with any tool, that you're using it ethically and you're not completely relying on it only. To the holistic piece, you had mentioned that you have been more interested in spirituality. And
Mhm.
I love those conversations. Would you be comfortable explaining what led to this and why?
The spirituality piece, I think it's something that ebbs and flows and moves in waves. So recognizing that I was raised with religion, but religion doesn't always amount to spirituality. So there
Very
was a
true.
book I was reading recently, and what's it called? Dying to Be Me by Anita Morjani. And that's a
Don't
really
know that
interesting
one.
book. She's a woman who lives in China. I don't know if she still does. She lived in China, but she had cancer and it ultimately brought her to the brink of death. And she had this out of body near death experience and was pretty conscious at the time and came back and was able to report on all sorts of things that she should not be able to report on in terms of where her family members were, conversations that were happening. And with that, she took back her experience from, the other side, so to speak, and had quite a message. So I've always been really interested in near death experiences, out of body experiences. Um, and anyway, in her book, she talks about religion being a path towards truth. Many, 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 many different paths towards truth, but spirituality is just truth, and they aren't necessarily correlated. So we
Oh,
can have
interesting.
experience of spirituality not tied to religion, and we can also have religion that is filled with spirituality. It's really up to the person. But so in that way, I think most people I work with, whatever the complaint or concern or symptom is, it tends to come from, if we call it a capital T trauma or a lowercase t trauma, it's
Mhm.
resistance to what is, and it's a low amount of acceptance.
Mm.
Spirituality could be the thing that unlocks greater acceptance and decreased resistance to it. And with that ease, it seems to allow energy to just flow a little bit more smoothly in ourselves and in our lives and in our relationships.
How do you feel the spirituality that helps to unlock that peace within trauma? I'm curious. Or to
Well,
make it flow more, what is it providing?
so I wish I remembered where this idea came from. Maybe it's from Eckhart Tolle, though I don't know if I've said his name out loud. I don't know if I know how to pronounce it, but he described this idea that there's like an animal brain, which exists with
Mhm.
a level that is pre-thought. It's a little bit lower than conscious thought. And then there's thought, and spirituality is being above thought. Kind of like this metacognition where you're really zoomed
Mm.
out and noticing what it's like to have an experience. So thinking similarly of Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, he
Mhm.
describes being I think he was mugged, he describes in that book, right? He was mugged. I think
Yes,
he might have been hit
yes.
over the head, and he was so interested and curious if he'd be traumatized that it kind of didn't happen to him. And I think that makes sense because he's so zoomed out and looking at what's it like to be me and just noticing that, which is really the heart of any meaningful spiritual practice. It's the heart of mindfulness training, right? It's the heart of
Mhm.
most grounding coping techniques is body integration without judgment. And so spirituality could be a good gateway into that, but it's also for meaning making. To go back to Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and this idea that you can endure anything if you have a reason why. And so
Mm.
spirituality perhaps could help us establish that.
That just for whatever reason, my brain went to my son and I, over the summer, we were fortunate enough to go on a school trip to the Anne Frank
Oh yeah,
Museum, and there was a recording of her father speaking about trying to make meaning and how having this museum, his old home where he hid for years, helping him to make meaning of why he survived and the rest of his family didn't.
sure. Yeah. Well, that's the heart of survivor's guilt is why me? Why not me? And I think that froze, but I'm recognizing here too that theme that it's zooming out and we want greater meaning and perspective than we're given in our small zoomed in experience. So by zooming out, perhaps he can find something in relation to his role in the larger collective, right?
Mhm.
Like the Jungian superconscious, or as Dan Siegel has even described in his states of integration, that the most zoomed out perspective is where we are in time and space in relation to other people while we're having our experience here. I think there is probably a fundamental human need to feel a sense of greater, almost spiritual integration somehow. But to clarify too, that spirituality doesn't mean you always have to theistically believe in something. Even
Right.
atheists can be very life affirming. And I'm not really invested in what somebody believes at all. I think it's ridiculous that somebody could tell somebody you do or do not believe the right thing or an appropriate thing. But I
Yeah.
think you can read in somebody, is this person happier, healthier, and more life affirming based on their belief system? And if not, then there might be something there to question further to deconstruct some ideas to build something that might be more constructive underneath that.
Now, do you do that within your practice or do you teach that or?
Sometimes, in practice, it depends on how open or interested people are in it. When people come to me and they're processing death or grief, it feels a little bit more natural. And it's
Mhm.
kind of like they're at this conflict between their heart and their mind. Their heart wants to believe more, wants to know more, or is experiencing something. And the mind just says, but over and over again. So, how do they reconcile that conflict? In the classroom, I am a big fan of the existential stuff. And I had these little existential thought experiments that just kind of examine the question of, are we nature or nurture or this combination of both, or yet something that's ineffable and it's this third element that really transcends time and space. So I'll ask students, like, if you could draw up every demographic detail of yours on the board,
Mhm.
your age, your sex, your race, your um, ability status, your language, your whatever. If you list that out to the 10th degree, and somebody just pulls a slot machine and they all turn up different, are you an entirely different person, or is there some Venn diagram overlap between who you were and who you are that transcends the nature and nurture of this stuff? And I think when you stay with that question with a lot of people, they feel like there is something uniquely them that transcends the vehicle they're in. So that idea doesn't always unlock it immediately, but staying with it, it sometimes helps people to get more in touch with this inner essence kind of a thing, if that makes any
Right.
sense.
No, it does. That regardless of the circumstances, the environment, things that have occurred, of course, it impacts you, but that your definition of you is internal and something that is there regardless. Very interesting. I did not get to have any of those exercises when I was at Northeastern.
Yeah, things get a little strange with me sometimes, but I like it that way.
I don't think it's strange. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I also find that questions like that help people to think in different ways. And so when they're coming in for therapy, it's not the same old, how do you feel? How do you feel? How did you feel about that? Right? Like it doesn't get to the root. It doesn't get to the nitty gritty of what is the puzzle piece that I don't see right now or you don't see.
Yeah, the emotional work can be a little palliative. It's essential for like real therapeutic growth, but the just checking in and the how are yous, it is palliative. It's just helping somebody to be comfortable. But again, back to Eckhart Tolle, I like that idea that what really makes change is conscious awareness. Just bringing your intention, your attention to something is enough to dissolve the tension that's there.
Couldn't agree more. This has been so much fun and so interesting.
Yeah,
Your students must really enjoy class with you.
some. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
I think more conversations are always needed around the variety of mental health and the different ways that it impacts individuals.
Absolutely. I'm
Uh, Before I let you go, I always put everybody on the spot and ask, what is one thing, a piece of advice or a statement or something that you wish you could tell your younger self that would have made life a little bit easier had you have thought of it, known it, believed it?
I don't know that this would really, knowing my youngers, I wouldn't believe me, but if I could get this like notarized,
Uh-huh.
I think it would be to say that every experience that feels painful and without reason, just trust me that the dots all connect later. You're just a little too zoomed in to see the full picture, but it does all come together.
Do you think that would have helped your younger self be able to wade through everything?
If I could believe in that faithfully, sure, then absolutely, because I think that's part of what makes pain painful is the not knowing.
No, I agree. The not knowing or understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anything that I've later been able to connect together, and there's some dots I'm still waiting to see how they connect, but I do believe now that it'll happen sooner or later. That's going to come together
It's not always easy in the moment, and that's not always what you wanna be told in the moment of
for
pain,
sure.
is that there's a reason for it, but when you can look back on it and see the reason, it does make things feel easier, if nothing else. Thank you for your time again, I really appreciate it, and it was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's good to
And to my listeners, thank you for listening to Notes to My Nervous System. If this spoke to you, please leave a review. Unless it's negative, I don't want to read that. Keep that to yourself. And if this speaks to someone that you know, please share it with them and subscribe. And as always, please be kind to your own wiring.